Day 29 began with rain. Not normal rain, but a wall of water falling from a sky gone black with fury. The simulation had dropped Zara on a tropical coast, and the weather display showed what was coming. A Category 5 hurricane, winds exceeding 250 kilometers per hour, storm surge that would swallow the coastline. Zara looked at the ocean churning white with rage, then at the forest behind her already bending under the wind. She had 12 hours before the hurricane made landfall, 12 hours to find shelter that could withstand the most powerful storm on Earth. Her ankle throbbed with each step. The infection had worsened despite her attempts to treat it. Her hands shook from exhaustion and hunger. She had been in this simulation for 29 days, pushed beyond any reasonable limit. The sabotage difficulty settings meant she faced challenges meant to be impossible, and somewhere in the storm-dark forest, predators were moving. The simulation's final cruelty: she was not alone. The display in her vision showed multiple heat signatures converging on her position. Pack hunters, wolves maybe, or something worse. In the observation room, the crowd had swelled to hundreds. Word had spread throughout the entire academy and beyond. Cadets abandoned classes to watch. Instructors canceled drills. Even coalition officials arrived, wanting to witness history. The human was attempting what no one had ever achieved: completing Earth simulation. "This is murder," Dr. Similik stated flatly, antennae rigid with anger. The hurricane alone would test a fresh cadet. Add infected wounds, exhaustion, and active predators. This is designed to kill her. Vexlar stood with all four arms crossed, his face carved from stone. She can quit at any time. The option remains available. Will she? They both knew the answer. Zara moved through the forest, ignoring the pain, focusing on survival. First priority, the predators. She could hear them now, moving through the underbrush, coordinating their approach. At least 6, maybe more. They were herding her, trying to drive her toward the coast where the storm waited. She refused to be herded. Zara changed direction suddenly, climbing uphill instead of running. The move surprised the pack. She heard confused vocalizations, the hunters adjusting their strategy. Good. Keep them uncertain. She found what she needed, a rocky outcropping with a small cave entrance. Too small for large predators, but big enough for her. She squeezed inside, pulling her pack after her. The cave extended back into darkness, offering depth and protection. But she could not just hide. The hurricane would flood this cave. She needed higher ground, but leaving meant facing the pack. Zara's mind worked through the problem, exhausted but still functioning. What would her ancestors do? Fire. They would use fire. She gathered dry wood from deeper in the cave, material that had been protected from moisture. She used her last matches, precious resources saved for emergencies. This qualified. The fire caught, grew, filled the cave entrance with light and smoke. Then Zara did something that made the watching cadets gasp. She grabbed burning branches and walked out of the cave. The wolves materialized from the forest, 6 large predators with hungry eyes. But they stopped when they saw her, saw the fire. Predators knew fire, feared it, respected it. Zara waved the burning branches, creating a wall of flame between herself and the pack. "Go," she shouted, her voice raw. "This is my territory, go." For a long moment the standoff held. Human and wolves, predator and predator, both born of Earth. Then the pack leader, a gray female, made a decision. She turned and melted back into the forest. The others followed. Zara dropped the burning branches, breathing hard. Around her the wind was rising. The outer bands of the hurricane were arriving. She had maybe 4 hours now. She needed higher ground immediately. She climbed, using the last of her strength to scale the rocky hillside. Her infected ankle screamed protest. Her hands bled from gripping stone. But she climbed. At the top, she found what she was looking for. A depression in the rock, a natural shelter with good drainage and solid walls. Zara used her knife to cut branches and vines. She wove them together, creating a barrier she could secure over the depression. It would not stop the hurricane, but it might keep her from being blown away. She anchored everything with rocks, working desperately as the wind rose to a howl. The rain intensified. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the ground. And then the hurricane arrived in full force. Wind hit like a physical blow, trying to tear her from the rock. Water fell in sheets so thick she could not breathe. Zara wedged herself into the depression, holding onto the barrier she had built and endured. The sound was beyond description. A freight train, an explosion, the end of the world. The barrier ripped away in the first hour. Zara grabbed onto rock with both hands, fingers finding cracks and holds. The wind tried to peel her loose. The rain was cold enough to cause hypothermia. Lightning struck close enough that she felt the electricity in her teeth, and she held on. In the observation room, cadets watched in absolute silence. They saw a small human clinging to rock while a planet tried to kill her. They saw her refuse to let go. Refuse to quit. Refuse to accept that this was impossible. Her body is shutting down, Dr. Similix reported, voice barely audible over the sound of her own distress. Core temperature critical. Muscle failure imminent. She has maybe 30 minutes before organ failure begins. Then she has 30 minutes to survive, Vexlar said quietly. Calethorn turned to face the instructor. You knew, he said. You knew she would face this. You knew about the sabotage. I suspected, Vexlar admitted. And I allowed it to continue because I needed to know. I needed to see if humans still had what made them dangerous. If soft lives and safe colonies had bred it out of them. And your answer? Vexlar pointed at the display where Zara clung to rock in the heart of a hurricane. That is my answer. 200 years away from Earth, and she still has it. The thing that let humans walk out of Africa with stone tools and conquer a planet. She is afraid. She is in pain. She is dying. And she will not quit. 27 minutes later, the hurricane began to ease. The eye of the storm passed overhead, bringing sudden, eerie calm. Zara lay on the rock, barely conscious. Every muscle screamed. Her fingers were locked in position, cramped from holding on so long. Her body temperature was dangerously low, but she was alive. She forced herself to move, knowing the other side of the storm would come. She crawled deeper into the rock depression, found a space where water had not pooled. She curled into a ball, making herself as small as possible, conserving heat. And she waited. The second half of the hurricane was shorter, but just as brutal. But Zara had position now, had shelter. She weathered it with grim determination. When it finally passed, when the wind dropped and the rain became merely heavy instead of apocalyptic, she opened her eyes. The world was washed clean. Water dripped from every surface. In the distance, the sun broke through clouds, painting everything gold. Zara checked her internal display. Day 30, 800 hours. She had done it. Simulation complete, she whispered. Then louder, simulation complete. The world dissolved. The neural pod opened. Hands helped her out, supported her as her legs failed. She was back in the white lab, surrounded by faces. Dr. Similix's scanner was already working, checking her vitals. Real medical staff rushed forward with supplies, but Zara barely noticed. She looked around at the observation windows, now packed with what looked like the entire academy, and they were silent, completely silent. Then Vexlar stepped forward. The massive Chthorian warrior moved slowly, deliberately. He stood before Zara, looked down at the small, injured, exhausted human. And then he did something no cadet had ever seen. He saluted. The gesture was crisp, military, perfect, holding it long enough that there could be no doubt. When he finally lowered his arm, he spoke quietly. Cadet Chen, you have accomplished what no being in Coalition history has achieved. You have completed Earth simulation. You have proven that humanity has not forgotten what made them dangerous. Zara swayed on her feet, barely able to stand. Permission to speak, sir? Granted. We were never dangerous, she said, her voice rough from days of talking to herself. We were survivors. That is what Earth taught us. That is what you never understood. We do not fight because we are strong. We fight because we refuse to quit, and that will never change no matter how far from Earth we go. Calethorn stepped forward, joining Vexlar. The Chthorian warrior inclined his head in respect. I mocked you, he said simply. I called humans weak. I was wrong. I have learned humility from watching you, and that is a lesson my people rarely learn. Other cadets came forward, one by one. Different species, different worlds, all showing respect in their own ways. The human had done what they could not, had survived what broke them, had proven that soft does not mean weak and small does not mean helpless. 3 days later, after medical treatment and rest, Zara stood before the Academy brass. A Coalition admiral addressed her formally. Cadet Chen, your achievement has not gone unnoticed. The Coalition is reforming the Extreme Environment Response Unit. We would like you to lead it. Zara stood at attention, her ankle in a walking cast, her hands bandaged. What is the mission, sir? The Vex swarm has returned. They are hitting colony worlds, places with soft populations that do not know how to fight. The conference room was cold, or at least it felt that way to Zarketh. His forearms trembled slightly as he settled into the chair designed for his insectoid body. The metal surface felt uncomfortable against his chitinous exoskeleton, but everything felt uncomfortable these days. Age had a way of making the universe hostile, even in the safest places. Across the curved table sat 5 representatives from the Galactic Council's Historical Preservation Committee. They watched him with various sets of eyes, some compound like his own, others single-lensed, one pair that glowed with bioluminescence. Behind them, recording devices hovered silently, capturing every word for the permanent archives. Ambassador Zarketh, the committee chair began, her translated voice soft through the universal communicator. She was a Thren, her blue skin marked with the gold patterns of her rank. Thank you for agreeing to this testimony. We understand this may be difficult. Difficult. The word almost made him laugh, but his species didn't laugh the way others did. Instead, his mandibles clicked together in what might have been bitter amusement. You want to know about the humans, he said. It wasn't a question. You want to know about the war that nearly destroyed us 50 years ago. You want to know why we fear them. The committee members exchanged glances. One of them, a young historian with too many academic honors and not enough real experience, leaned forward eagerly. The records from that time are incomplete. Much was classified. You're the last survivor who was there from the beginning. Your testimony will help future generations understand. Understand what? Zarketh interrupted. His voice came out harsher than he intended. How we almost committed genocide because we were arrogant. How we learned that the universe doesn't care about our peaceful intentions when we try to force them on others. The room fell silent. The committee chair raised one delicate hand. Please, Ambassador, start from the beginning. Tell us what happened. Zarketh's compound eyes shifted, unfocusing as he pulled his mind back through 50 years of memory. The treaty signing with Earth had happened just last month. Humans were now full members of the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. But the path to that moment had been soaked in blood, mostly alien blood. 50 years ago, he began, his voice steadier now. The galactic community was different. We were proud. We had achieved something we thought was impossible. 217 species working together in peace. No wars, no famine, no unnecessary suffering. We had solved the problems that plagued civilizations, or so we believed. He paused, reaching for the water container designed for his physiology. The liquid tasted flat, recycled too many times, but it helped his dry throat. I was younger then, obviously. I had served in the diplomatic corps for 30 cycles, facilitating first contact with newly discovered species. It was usually routine. We would find a species approaching space travel capability, study them from a distance, and when the time was right, we would introduce ourselves. Most species were grateful. Some were suspicious at first, but they always came around when they saw the benefits of joining the community. The committee members nodded. This was standard procedure, well documented. Then we found Earth, Zarketh continued, a blue planet in an unremarkable system orbiting a yellow star. The species there called themselves humans. They had already achieved space travel within their own solar system. They had stations on their moon, probes exploring their outer planets. They were right at the threshold. His mandibles clicked again, but this time it was nervous energy. The council debated for months. The humans were violent. Their history was soaked in warfare. Even at the time we discovered them, they had weapons capable of destroying their entire planet several times over. Many council members wanted to quarantine them, wait another few centuries until they had matured as a species. But others argued for immediate contact. They said every species goes through a violent phase. They said the humans showed promise. They had art, music, philosophy. They had begun to unite their planet under international cooperation. The optimists won the vote. Zarketh remembered that vote. He had voted for contact himself. The memory made his insides twist with something that might have been shame or regret or both. I was assigned to the first contact fleet, 300 ships representing 50 different species. We were a symbol of what the galaxy could achieve through cooperation. We brought gifts, technology, offers of trade and cultural exchange. We were so certain they would welcome us, the young historian interrupted. But they did welcome you initially, didn't they? The records show the first 6 months went well. Yes, Zarketh admitted. The first contact was everything we hoped for. The humans were excited, curious, maybe too eager. They wanted to learn everything at once. They asked millions of questions about our technology, our cultures, our history. They sent delegations to our ships. We visited their cities. It seemed perfect. He stopped, and the silence stretched. The committee waited, sensing that the story was about to turn. Then the accident happened, Zarketh said quietly, on their lunar base. We had established a joint facility there, a place where humans and aliens could work together. One of the habitat modules failed. A Velkari child, just 10 cycles old, died when the oxygen system malfunctioned. The memory was still sharp after all these years. He had been on the flagship when the news came. The child's name was Teclin. He could still see her face in his mind, her compound eyes bright with curiosity about the strange humans she had been so excited to meet. It was an accident, he continued. The investigation proved that. Human equipment was designed for human biology. They hadn't fully adapted their systems for other species yet. There was no malice, no negligence beyond normal startup complications. These things happen when different technologies try to work together for the first time. But Teclin was dead, and her parents demanded justice. And the Krindal, he nearly spat the name. The Krindal saw an opportunity. The Krindal were the closest thing the galactic community had to a warrior species. Even in peace, they maintained the largest military force, ostensibly for defense against external threats. But they had never quite adapted to the diplomatic approach the rest of the galaxy preferred. They convinced the Council that humans were dangerous, that the accident proved humans couldn't be trusted with advanced technology or membership in the community. They pushed for sanctions, for oversight, for what they called protective probation. Zarketh's voice grew harder. I argued against it. I told them that humans would see it as an insult, as a violation of their sovereignty. But I was overruled. The Council voted to present humanity with an ultimatum: submit to galactic oversight and monitoring, or face economic and military isolation. He looked directly at the committee members. That was our first mistake. We assumed humans would choose the practical option. We assumed they valued survival and prosperity over pride. We were wrong. The words hung in the air like a condemnation. The committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this was the moment where everything went wrong. The human ambassador, I can still see his face, listened to our ultimatum in complete silence. Then he stood up, thanked us for our time, and politely asked us to leave their solar system. He said Earth would contact us again when they were ready on their own terms. Then he walked out. Zarketh's mandibles trembled. We didn't understand. The Krindal called it defiance, an insult that couldn't be tolerated. They said a limited military action would force compliance, that humans would surrender quickly when faced with superior force. The Council, in its arrogance, agreed. The old diplomat's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That was our second mistake, and it nearly destroyed us all. The ice walls of the Europa base gleamed under artificial lighting as human guards escorted Zarketh through narrow corridors carved deep beneath the moon's frozen surface. His injuries from the capture had been treated immediately, competently, even gently. It confused him more than anything else about this whole situation. They brought him to a small room with basic furniture and a window showing the vast underground cavern where the base had been built. Hundreds of humans moved through the space below, working on ships, tending hydroponic gardens, caring for children. This wasn't a military installation. It was a refugee camp pretending to be a fortress, or perhaps the other way around. A human woman entered the room. She wore a simple uniform with insignia that Zarketh's translator identified as indicating she was a captain. She was middle-aged by human standards, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that looked tired but alert. She carried 2 containers and set one in front of Zarketh. Water, she said, gesturing to his container. We synthesized it to match your physiology requirements. It should be safe, but if you feel any discomfort, let us know immediately. Zarketh stared at her. You're treating me like a guest, not a prisoner. The woman smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. You're both. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, commander of this facility, and you're Ambassador Zarketh of the Velkari delegation. We know who you are. We know you voted against the blockade in the early council sessions. You have spies, Zarketh said. It wasn't a question. We have people who pay attention, Chen replied, sitting across from him. Ambassador, I want to have a conversation with you, not an interrogation. You're not going to give us military intelligence. You're a diplomat, not a soldier. But I think you deserve to understand what's happening here, what you're really fighting. Zarketh's mandibles clicked nervously. I know what we're fighting. A species too dangerous to join the galactic community without oversight. No, Chen said quietly. You're fighting people who have learned that trust is earned, not demanded. Let me tell you a story, Ambassador. About human history. She took a drink from her own container. Humans have existed as a species for about 200,000 years. For most of that time, we were scattered in small groups just trying to survive. About 10,000 years ago, we developed agriculture. We built cities, civilizations, empires, and for all those thousands of years, we fought each other. Zarketh had read the human history files, the wars, the genocides, the endless conflicts. I know, that's why the Council was concerned. But do you know why we fought? Chen asked. It wasn't because we're inherently violent or savage. We fought because trust was impossible. Every civilization that ever trusted a more powerful neighbor eventually got conquered or destroyed. Every group that submitted to benevolent oversight eventually lost their freedom, their culture, their identity. Sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, but always inevitably. She leaned forward, her voice intense. My ancestors came from China, one of Earth's oldest continuous civilizations. Do you know how many times they were conquered? How many times they were told by invaders that submission would bring peace and prosperity? And do you know what happened every single time? Cultural genocide. Not always physical, sometimes just the slow erasure of language, customs, identity. The conquerors always said they were helping. They always said it was for our own good. Zarketh wanted to argue, but something in her voice made him listen. Other humans have similar stories, Chen continued. Europeans colonized entire continents, destroying indigenous cultures while claiming to civilize them. Empires rose and fell, each one promising peace and delivering oppression. Even in our modern era, every time a powerful nation offered protection to a weaker one, it came with strings that slowly strangled autonomy. So when you showed up, she said, her voice hardening, with your 300 ships and your ultimatum, what do you think we saw? We saw every conqueror from our history, wearing a new face and speaking a new language but making the same promises and demands. We're not conquerors, Zarketh protested. The galactic community is peaceful. We've solved war. Species thrive under our cooperation, have you? Chen asked. Or have you just created a system where resistance is impossible? Ambassador, we studied your community for 6 months before you delivered that ultimatum. We watched how new species are integrated. They get technology, yes. Resources, yes. But they also give up sovereignty. They agree to have their military limited, their industry regulated, their culture monitored for problematic elements. You call it cooperation. We call it colonization with better marketing. Zarketh felt something uncomfortable stirring in his mind. Those regulations exist for good reasons. To prevent war, to ensure fair distribution of resources, to ensure compliance, Chen interrupted. Ambassador, I'm not saying your system is evil. Maybe it works for species that evolved differently, whose histories taught them different lessons. But humans learned one thing over and over across 10,000 years of civilization. Freedom lost is almost impossible to regain. And once you let someone else make decisions for you, even with good intentions, you lose the ability to determine your own fate. She stood and walked to the window, looking at the people below. That's why we evacuated Earth. That's why billions of people abandoned their homes and came out here to hide in ice caves and asteroid tunnels. Not because we hate you, not because we wanted this war, but because we saw what would happen if we submitted. We would have gotten technology we didn't develop ourselves, become dependent on it, on you. Within a generation, maybe 2, we would forget how to be self-sufficient. We would forget how to make our own decisions. And when we finally realized what we'd lost, it would be too late. We would be just another species in the community, grateful for your protection, quietly erasing anything about ourselves that made you uncomfortable. Zarketh's voice was barely a whisper. So you chose war? No, Chen said firmly. We chose resistance. There's a difference. We told you to leave. You refused. You blockaded our system. You tried to force us into submission. We're just refusing to cooperate with our own subjugation. But the suicide attacks, Zarketh said, the kamikaze runs, your people die without hesitation. Chen turned back to him, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. You think that's easy for us? You think we celebrate those deaths? Ambassador, every person who dies in this war is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. We mourn them. We remember their names. We tell their stories to our children so they'll never be forgotten. But we die anyway, she continued, because the alternative is worse than death. We would rather cease to exist as a species than exist as your pets. That's not savagery. That's the same choice every free being would make if they truly understood what was at stake. The room fell silent. Zarketh processed her words, comparing them to everything he had believed about the war, about humans, about the galactic community itself. Your people are terrified of us, Chen said quietly. We've seen the intercepted communications. They call us monsters, demons, creatures who love death. But that's not what scares them, is it? What really terrifies them is that we're willing to die for something they don't understand. Because your people have lived in peace for so long, they've forgotten that some things are worth dying for. She returned to her seat. I'm going to release you, Ambassador. You'll be returned to your fleet unharmed. I want you to carry a message to your council. Zarketh's mandibles clicked in surprise. You're releasing me? We're not barbarians, Chen said. And we want this war to end. But it will only end one way. When you leave our system and let us develop on our own terms. Tell your council that we'll stop fighting the moment you stop trying to control us. Not before. They'll never agree, Zarketh said. The Krindal especially. They see this as a matter of principle now. Then people will keep dying, Chen said sadly. Yours and ours. But eventually your people will realize they can't win, because we've already accepted the worst possible outcome. We've made peace with extinction. Can your people say the same? Zarketh had no answer to that. 3 days later, humans released him in an escape pod near the Galactic Fleet's position. As promised, he was unharmed and had been given supplies for the journey. When he was debriefed by the Krindal command, he delivered Captain Chen's message word for word. The commander's response was predictable. More attacks, heavier bombardment, total war until the humans surrendered. But Zarketh noticed something in the eyes of the other officers. They were starting to understand what he had learned in that ice cave on Europa. They were fighting an enemy that had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose but their freedom, and that made humans the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy. The war changed after Zarketh's return. Not immediately and not in ways the Krindal command wanted to acknowledge, but changed nonetheless. The ambassador's report spread through the fleet despite attempts to classify it. Soldiers talked. Officers whispered to each other during off-duty hours. And slowly the certainty that had driven the blockade began to crack. Zarketh watched it happen from his position as diplomatic observer, a role that had become largely meaningless now that diplomacy had failed. He attended strategy meetings where Krindal commanders planned new offensives, but he could see the doubt in the eyes of other species representatives. They were winning the war by any conventional measure, but it felt like losing. The human attacks continued with relentless persistence. They had adapted their tactics, learning from each engagement. Small groups would coordinate strikes across multiple locations simultaneously, forcing the galactic fleet to spread thin. They mined asteroid fields and left traps in debris clouds. They learned to predict patrol routes and hit supply convoys with devastating precision. But it was the casualties that wore down the galactic forces more than anything else. Not just the deaths themselves, but the way humans made sure everyone knew about them. Every fallen alien's name, face, and story was broadcast. Families received personal messages, not threats, but something worse, condolences. Humans would send messages saying they were sorry, that they wished this war had never happened, that they hoped the family would find peace, then they would go right back to fighting. The psychological impact was crushing. How do you maintain fighting spirit when your enemy apologizes for killing you while continuing to kill you? 8 months into the war, the Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from across the galaxy demanded answers. Why were they still fighting? What was the goal? Victory was supposed to come quickly, but human resistance showed no signs of breaking. The public wanted their soldiers home. Zarketh was called to testify. He stood before the assembled council in a chamber where 200 species had once celebrated their unity, and now he told them the uncomfortable truth. We cannot win this war, he said simply, not because humans are stronger than us, not because we lack firepower or resources. We cannot win because humans have already made peace with losing everything except their freedom, and we have not. The Krindal representative, a massive creature with scales that reflected the chamber's light like armor, rose to his full height. Defeatist words, Ambassador. We're winning every engagement. Their numbers dwindle while ours remain strong. Their numbers dwindle and they keep fighting, Zarketh replied. Our numbers remain strong, and our soldiers lose the will to fight. General, when was the last time you visited your fleet? When was the last time you looked into the eyes of the soldiers you send into combat? The general said nothing. Zarketh continued. I've spoken with them. They're exhausted. They're traumatized. They don't understand why they're fighting anymore, and neither do their families back home. How many protests have erupted on Velkar? On Thren? On Kolmar? The people want this to end. A representative from a small aquatic species spoke up, her voice bubbling through translation. But if we leave now, we admit defeat. We show the galaxy that defiance of the Council is acceptable. Other species might think they can reject our oversight. Good, Zarketh said, surprising even himself with the vehemence. Maybe they should have that choice. Maybe we've been wrong to assume that every species needs or wants our protection. Maybe humans are showing us something we've forgotten, that freedom matters more than safety. The chamber erupted into argument. Some supported his words. Others called them dangerous, radical, a betrayal of everything the community stood for. The debate raged for hours. Meanwhile, in Sol System, the war ground on. A major offensive was launched against the human base in the asteroid belt. The Krindal general, determined to prove Zarketh wrong, committed a third of the fleet to a decisive strike. Intelligence suggested this base was crucial to human operations, a central coordination point for their scattered forces. The intelligence was correct. It was also bait. Human forces allowed the galactic fleet to approach the base to begin their attack, to commit fully to the assault. Then they sprang their trap. Ships hidden in the asteroid field activated simultaneously. Rocks that had seemed like natural debris revealed themselves as disguised vessels. And from the base itself came a transmission that would become infamous in galactic military history. You wanted to see how far we'd go, the human voice said. You wanted to know if we were bluffing about accepting death. Let us show you. The base detonated, not from galactic weapons, but from charges the humans had placed themselves. The entire installation, with hundreds of humans still inside, became a massive bomb. The explosion was calculated, directed, designed to cause maximum damage to the surrounding fleet. 73 galactic ships were destroyed instantly. Thousands more crew members died in the following hours as damaged vessels failed. The human base and everyone in it was simply gone. The general survived. When he returned to the flagship, he was different. The confidence, the certainty was gone from his eyes. Zarketh was there when he delivered his report to the council. They destroyed themselves, the general said, his voice hollow. Hundreds of their own people. They could have evacuated, could have abandoned the base and lived to fight another day. Instead, they turned themselves into a weapon. Not because they had to, because they chose to. The council chamber was silent. I have fought in many wars, the general continued. I have faced enemies who were stronger, smarter, better equipped. But I have never faced an enemy who frightened me. Until now. These humans don't fight like any species I've ever encountered. They fight like they're already dead and just haven't stopped moving yet. Zarketh watched the representatives process this. Some looked horrified. Others looked thoughtful. But most looked tired. A week later, something unexpected happened. The humans released all their prisoners. Every captured galactic soldier. Every crew member from destroyed ships who had been recovered from escape pods. Every intelligence operative who had been caught. All of them. Returned unharmed. They arrived in medical shuttles, dozens of them, approaching the fleet with white flags and no weapons. The prisoners who emerged were healthy, well-fed, and psychologically evaluated. They had been treated according to galactic standards for prisoner treatment, better in many cases, than those standards required. Each prisoner carried a data chip with their medical records and a personal message. The messages were all variations of the same theme. We don't want to be your enemies. We just want to be free. End this war and go home. The impact on morale was immediate. Soldiers who had been told they were fighting monsters found themselves confronting the fact that those monsters had treated captured comrades with more compassion. Then some galactic commanders showed their own troops. 3 days after the prisoner release, the human broadcast went out. It was transmitted on every frequency, aimed at every world in the galactic community. Captain Sarah Chen's face appeared on view screens across 200 civilizations. "People of the galaxy," she began. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a human, a captain in Earth's defense forces, and a mother of 2 children who I hope will grow up in a better universe than the one we're creating right now." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes reflecting exhaustion and determination in equal measure. "For 8 months we've been at war. Your governments tell you we're dangerous, that we need to be controlled, that this conflict is for everyone's safety. But that's not true. We're fighting because we were given an impossible choice. Surrender our freedom or be destroyed. We chose neither. We chose to resist. We don't hate you," she continued. "We don't want to kill your soldiers or destroy your ships. Every death in this war weighs on us. We remember every name, every face, every story. But we will continue fighting, continue dying, because the alternative is to live as something less than free beings." Her voice softened. "We've released your prisoners because they're not our enemies. You're not our enemies. Your government's made this choice, not you. And we want you to know what they're asking you to die for. Not safety, not peace, but the principle that a stronger power has the right to control a weaker one. Ask yourselves, is that principle worth your lives?" "We're making you an offer," Chen said. "Leave our system. Let us develop on our own terms at our own pace. When we're ready, and only when we're ready, we'll come to you. We'll join your community, but as equals, not as subjects. That's all we ask. The freedom to choose our own future." She paused, and when she spoke again, there were tears in her eyes. "Or keep fighting, and we'll keep dying. All of us. Until there's nothing left but regret and ashes. The choice is yours." The broadcast ended. Within 24 hours, protests erupted on 17 worlds. Within 48 hours, that number had tripled. Within a week, the Galactic Council could no longer ignore the simple fact that their people didn't want this war anymore. The vote to end the blockade passed with 70% support. The Krindal and their allies voted against it, calling it cowardice and dishonor, but they were outnumbered. Zarketh's voice had grown hoarse from talking, but he pressed on. The committee needed to hear the rest. The galaxy needed to understand what happened after the war, and why the fear of humans had never really gone away. The Galactic Council established a 50-year non-interference zone around Sol system, he continued. No ships were allowed within 1 light year of Earth without explicit human permission. We offered humanitarian aid to help them rebuild. They refused. They said they would rebuild themselves their own way with their own resources. The young historian leaned forward. "But they did accept some things, didn't they? The historical records show trade agreements, cultural exchanges." 40 years later, Zarketh interrupted. "For 40 years, humans stayed in their system and we heard nothing from them. Nothing. They didn't ask for help. They didn't request technology or resources. They just worked. And we watched from a distance, wondering what they were doing." He remembered those years clearly. The debates in the council about whether they had made a mistake, whether humans were building weapons of revenge, whether the silence was more dangerous than the war had been. Some species wanted to reinstate the blockade. Others argued for patience. In the end, they waited because there was no other choice. Then the humans came back, Zarketh said, not with warships or threats, with a diplomatic vessel requesting a meeting with the Galactic Council. The same Captain Sarah Chen I had met on Europa, now an admiral, led their delegation. She was older, gray in her hair, lines around her eyes, but the same determination. That meeting had been tense. 200 species gathering to face the humans who had humiliated them, who had proven that the galactic community's peace was built on assumptions that could be shattered. Zarketh had been there, one of the few survivors from the original First Contact who was still alive and active. Admiral Chen stood before us and said something I'll never forget. Zarketh continued. She said, "We've spent 40 years rebuilding our civilization and learning from our isolation. We've made mistakes. We've struggled. We've lost people to accidents and disease that your technology could have prevented. But we did it ourselves. And now we're ready to talk about joining your community, not as subjects, as equals." The Krindal representative at that meeting had stood up, his scales bristling with anger. "You murdered thousands of our people. You defied the will of the entire galaxy. And now you want to join us as equals." Chen had looked at him without flinching. "We defended ourselves against your attempt to colonize us. And yes, we want to join you, because isolation isn't what we wanted either. We just needed to do it on our terms when we were ready, not when you decided we should be ready." The negotiations took years, Zarketh said. Every detail was argued over. Humans refused any restrictions on their military or technology that didn't apply to all species equally. They refused monitoring or oversight that other species didn't face. They insisted on maintaining their own government, their own laws, their own culture without interference. Many species objected. They said humans should face consequences for the war, that they shouldn't get special treatment. But Chen always gave the same answer. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal treatment. If you wouldn't impose these restrictions on yourselves, don't impose them on us. The logic was unassailable, and that's what made it so frustrating for those who had fought the war. Humans weren't asking for anything unreasonable. They were just refusing to accept anything less than what established members already had. The breakthrough came when humans shared what they'd been doing for 40 years, Zarketh said. They'd been developing their own technology, not copying ours. They'd figured out their own faster-than-light travel, their own energy systems, their own medical advances. They'd done in 40 years what took most species centuries, not because they were smarter, but because they had something to prove. They opened their research to the entire community, free. No patents, no trade restrictions. We don't want to hoard knowledge, Chen said. We just want to make sure no one can use knowledge as a leash. That gesture had changed everything. Humans had proven they could be trusted, that they wanted cooperation, that they valued the community's ideals, just not at the cost of their autonomy. 5 years ago, Earth became a full member of the galactic community, Zarketh said, with all the same rights, responsibilities, and restrictions as any other member. No more, no less. Admiral Chen retired shortly after the treaty was signed. I spoke with her one last time at the ceremony. He could still see her face, older now but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. They had stood together watching the treaty document being signed, and she had turned to him. "Thank you," she had said. "For what?" he had asked, confused. "I failed to prevent the war." "No," she replied. "You tried. And more importantly, you learned. You understood what we were fighting for, even when others couldn't. You helped convince the council to listen. Without you, we might still be enemies." "We're still feared," Zarketh had told her. "People see humans and remember the war. They remember the suicide attacks, the deaths, the base that detonated itself." "Good," Chen had said, surprising him. "Not because we want to be feared, but because that fear reminds everyone that freedom matters, that there are things worth dying for. Your people had forgotten that, living in your peaceful community. We reminded you, that lesson is worth the price we paid." Now, sitting before the Historical Preservation Committee 50 years after that terrible war began, Zarketh understood what she had meant. The galaxy had changed because of humans. Species questioned council decisions more. They asserted their rights more forcefully. They remembered that they had choices, even when faced with greater power. "You asked me why we fear humans," Zarketh said, looking at each committee member in turn. "It's not their technology. We have species with more advanced technology. It's not their fighting ability. We have warrior species that are physically superior. It's not even their willingness to die, though that's certainly part of it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We fear humans because they showed us something we had forgotten. That peace isn't the absence of the capacity for war. It's the choice to pursue peace despite having that capacity. For generations we've had peace because war seemed impossible. Humans showed us that real peace requires the daily choice not to fight even when you could. But more than that," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "we fear them because they're unpredictable. Every other species in the galaxy will negotiate when faced with overwhelming force. We all value survival above principle. Humans don't. You can push them, threaten them, blockade them, attack them, and you'll never know if you've pushed too far until it's too late." The young historian spoke up. "But humans have been model members of the community for the past 5 years. They've contributed technology, participated in diplomatic efforts, helped mediate disputes. They've shown they can be peaceful." "Yes," Zarketh agreed, "and that makes them even more frightening. Because we know that peace is their choice, not their nature. We know that underneath the diplomatic smiles and cultural exchanges, humans are still the same species that turned themselves into weapons rather than submit. They've just chosen not to." He looked at the camera recording his testimony, thinking about the future generations who would watch this. The galaxy learned something 45 years ago. The most dangerous species isn't the one that loves war. It's the one that will fight when it has everything to lose and nothing to gain except its freedom. You can negotiate with someone who fears death. You can't negotiate with someone who has already made peace with it. Humans taught us that lesson in Blood and Fire. And we fear them because we know, we will always know, that if we ever forget that lesson, they'll teach it to us again. The committee sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, the chair spoke. Is there anything else you want to add, Ambassador? Zarketh thought about Admiral Chen, about the humans who had died in that base detonation, about the Velkari child whose death had started everything. He thought about all the lives lost because the galaxy had assumed it knew what was best for everyone. Just this, he said. Last month, Earth hosted the 50-year anniversary commemoration of the war's end. Admiral Chen died 2 years ago, but her children organized the ceremony. They invited me. They invited all the survivors from both sides. We gathered in a memorial they built, a wall with every name of everyone who died in the war. Human and alien, no distinction, no separation. Just names, thousands of them. And at the dedication, Chen's daughter said something that I think explains humans better than anything else. Zarketh's voice was barely a whisper now. She said, when we don't celebrate what happened here, we don't glorify the deaths or the fighting. We remember them as a warning, as a reminder of what happens when people forget that freedom is not negotiable. My mother fought so we could choose our own future. Those who died here on both sides died because someone thought they knew better. Let this memorial ensure we never forget the cost of that arrogance. He looked directly at the committee. That's why we fear humans, not because they're violent or irrational or monstrous. We fear them because they understand something we forgot.